Hello! In this video, I'll be showing you how to draw this. I'm using the program MediBang Paint on an iPad with an Apple Pen. MediBang is totally free, and I would definitely recommend using it. And yeah, let's get started. So first we start with the base. For the basic sketch step, I just use a regular pencil brush. You can use any size you want, like whatever is totally comfortable for you. As you can see, I'm using a 22 pixel brush. It kind of varies on the canvas size, so yeah. So we'll start with circle and then draw this line, which dictates where the head is facing, extend over the scalp. Next, carve out the flat side of the head where the ear is, and then sketch out the other side, like the cheek side. Then build in the neck. For me, placing that second neckline near the chin is always a little tricky. The neckline that near the ear is easier because, it just extends out from the earlobe area. But I don't know, the one near the chin is just kind of hard. After you've drawn the base, then add on features like hair and shoulders. I decided to go for a short hair look just because I usually draw long hair, so I wanted to switch it up a little. And also, I recently drew a fan art of this character from the webtoon Seasons of Blossom, and drawing her hair was really fun, so I wanted to try something similar. Next, make a new layer by clicking this plus button and lower the opacity of the sketch layer with this slider bar, and then go over the sketch with a little bit more definition, but not line art yet. I usually do 2 or 3 layers of just sharpening the drawing to make sure I really like it. In this stage, I also add a rough idea of where the eyes and nose are going to be. When you have a sketch you like, now comes the line art. My brush of choice is the school pen. It's like a normal pen, but it has these little notches, like a little bit of texture. I just like it better for line art than the regular pen. I think it's a little bit more interesting. Similar to the pencil for sketching, the size kind of varies on the canvas size. So for this drawing, I'm using printer paper size, so 8.5 by 11, and my line art brush is in the 20 to 30 pixel range. Something super helpful that makes line art so much easier is the size by pressure and opacity by pressure functions. This might seem really basic to a lot of people, but definitely when I was starting out, I didn't like using them because I thought it made my line art look uneven. In truth, I just wasn't using it right, and they're super helpful functions. As the name indicates, it changes the size or opacity by your pen pressure. If you press super hard, it comes out really big and dark, but if you press lightly, it's thinner and lighter. When doing line art, just know that there's no shame in using the back button. Use quick, bold strokes in medium lengths. Too short and your lines look choppy, but too long and they look wobbly. Also, don't press too hard for too long, because again, it'll look wobbly. Also know that a little bit of messiness actually looks good, and you can just go over where a line is supposed to end and then erase the extra. So when I'm doing hairline art, I usually like to create a separate layer for the hair details. Since those little details overlap with the main line art so much, I like having the insurance of being able to erase it painlessly if I don't like them. Another line art tip is to draw varying width strokes. The outermost outline should have the thickest lines, while the finer details, especially in hair, should be thinner. I didn't like how thin all the lines were, so you can see me going over them in a separate layer. The issue with that is that then it looked messy, so Here I'm just relining all of it in a new layer using a thicker pen size. This is where the size by pressure function is super useful. I can draw both thick outlines and thinner hair detail lines without having to constantly switch the pen size. Now I'm sharpening up the eye sketch a little on, you guessed it, a new layer. I use a lot of layers. This won't be my final line art for the eyes. I actually have a special way of doing the eyeliner. Honestly, the placement of the eyes is basically just intuitive for me. I don't really have a method to place where the eyes go. I will say I personally like the bangs or the hair to overlap with the eyes a lot. I also add the eyebrows and the mouth in this step. Mouths are always like the hardest part for me, so now I'm just, keeping it nice and simple. Also, if you don't like the positioning of something, you can just select that part and move it around or make it bigger or smaller, as I'm doing here. It's really helpful. Now I'm doing my final eyeliner. I'll probably end up making another video just on how I do my eyeliner and how I color it, because if I do it in this video, it'll just take way too long. Here, I'm just doing these little shadow things on top of the line art using a basic pen brush. Basically, look for the triangles or the points where the hair overlaps and fill it in a little. It just adds some dimension to the line art. Okay, as you can see, I've chosen the colors in my palette and I have them all nice and neat right there. Now we start filling in. I personally like to fill in my colors by hand with the pen brush, since the fill function never really turns out quite right for me. It just makes me feel better because I know that everything will be done exactly how I like it, and I have that assurance. It takes a lot longer, but I'm not crunched for time, and I find it kind of relaxing to just color it in. I'm actually doing 2 different hair colors, so I just made a new layer for the second one, and that way I can shade them separately. Now I'm filling in the skin. I'm just using the skin color I use for my OC. Since I have it saved in my palette, it's just easier. Since the color is so light, it can be hard to see against a white background. And for this reason, when I fill in the skin, I like to turn the background color to a dark color, usually just red, because that's what's right there. And that way I can see exactly what is being colored and what is not. Now we're doing shading. Again, for skin, I already have the shading tones saved in my palette, so I'm just using those. When shading skin, I use one much darker shade and one shade that's kind of in between. Create a new layer above the skin base and pick clipping by just selecting this button. This makes it so that everything drawn on this layer only appears in the places where the stuff on the base layer is. So everything adheres to what's drawn on the base layer. Using the darker shade and the regular pen brush, do the precise shadows. These are under hair pieces and the neck. If we had ears, then I would shade the ears with that. And then create another layer in between the darker shadows and the skin flats. Make sure clipping is selected again. And using the lighter shading tone, which is kind of in between the dark one and your base tone, and the airbrush brush, not on full opacity, lightly shade the top area of the head and also the collar area. It just kind of adds some more dimension. You can also do some on the neck if you'd like. Using just a regular white color, black out the eye whites in a clipped layer on top of skin. For this, I use a combination of pen and low opacity airbrush. If I'm drawing a darker skinned person, I like to use a slightly off-white color because the straight white is a little bit bright. And we're also going to eventually add some blush or like redness in the cheeks, but I like to save that for the end. Now for the hardest part, the hair shading. Make a clipped layer on top of the hair flats, and using a pen, just color a bunch of white on top of the hair, like on the upper half. Then find a shade that's a little darker than your hair flats and create a new clipped layer and draw out your hair shading. This is basically just carving out your highlights. I like to use the hard watercolor brush on a medium opacity hard edge. It's kind of backwards of how you'd expect to do the highlights. Instead of drawing the highlights just regularly, you're kind of creating them by drawing this stuff around them instead. Like the eye placement, this is also kind of intuitive. It can take a few tries to get right, as you can see, but yeah. Go over the bottom of the hair with this darker shade too. It's better if it looks a little, like, not patchy, but it's not all the same color, like some variation. Get an even darker color and a new clipped layer, then using the airbrush, lightly shade the bottom part of the hair to make it a little darker. You just kind of want this gradient. Using that same color and a pen brush on another layer, do the precise hair shadows. You'll be drawing a lot of triangle-ish shapes at the end of hair and like along lines. Try to envision what chunks of hair you want to be on top of other chunks. Like, I want this piece to be on top of that bigger piece because that's just how the line art kind of makes it look. So I'll shade underneath the smaller piece to create that illusion. So I don't always do this, but for this particular drawing, the middle of the top of the head looked kind of empty. So I just made the center a little bit darker using the watercolor brush. Hair shading is often very situational, which is what makes it so hard. Now for the second hair color. Since it's the underneath bit, I want to keep it pretty simple just to create a certain effect, kind of like this. So using a darker shade of that color, I'm just filling in some of the blocks I made during line art and like underneath the hair on top. I'll also shape it a little bit with the airbrush on a low opacity. Especially when I'm doing hair, my airbrush kind of just constantly stays in the 20 to 50 opacity range. It never really goes above that. Next, I'm doing the eyes. Again, I'm gonna make a separate video on eyes, so we're just gonna speed right through this. I do have a set method for eyes, unlike hair, so I think that'll be good for just a different video. Okay, now that the eyes is finished, just add a little bit of close shading. Often when I do a portrait style like this, I like to do a little bit of a gradient on the bottom with the airbrush. However, since the canvas size is on the larger side, the airbrush wasn't really big enough because it kept looking like patchy, so I didn't do as much of a gradient this time. You can see it takes a couple tries to get right. Okay, Now that most of the shading is done, here's where we add the blush. Using a clipped layer on top of your skin, just underneath the eye whites, shade a little bit on the cheeks with an airbrush. I tend to favor going lighter rather than heavier. If you want to pick a blush color, you kind of have to decide what goes with the palette. Like, sometimes it looks good to do a more orangey shade, but for this one, a pink shade looked better. Something I also like to do is pick this orangey red color and just airbrush a little bit around the eyes. I think it looks pretty cool and it just adds an extra little something. Okay, we're almost done. So now we're basically just refining. This cool little trick that I learned is you just like pick a color that's kind of your character's theme color. I chose a tealy shade since that's her eye and under hair color, and then make it darker. And then on a clipped layer on top of line art, just go over some of the line art. I like to do inner hairlines, under the neck, stuff like that. I also do like the under eye lines. It's just one of those little details that adds something special and makes it look a little cooler. Now for the background. I never really do very complicated backgrounds, so I just did a simple gradient underneath, again using that theme color. Yeah, you just use that tool. I wanted to add some fancy stuff on top, but ran into the brushes too small for the canvas issue. So what I did was I drew it out, and then using this tool, I'm not totally sure what it calls, but it basically like lets you transform whatever is on that layer, like make it bigger, smaller, stretch, shrink. Yeah. Using that tool, I just made it bigger and then positioned it so it was right. I also turned that petal layer into an add layer, which basically makes whatever is on that layer all like shiny and nice and kind of glowy. It adds an interesting effect. So there we have it. We're all done. Thank you.